March 1942, North African desert, midday. The sun hangs like molten iron over the Libyan sand. British supply columns stretch across the wasteland, their shadows short and black beneath them. In the back of a Bedford truck, a soldier named Private Thomas Hendricks watches gasoline drip from a flimsy tin canister onto the scorching ground. The fuel evaporates before it can pool. He curses softly, tilting the container to see the split seam along its welded edge. This is the third can to fail today. Around him, 200 gallons of precious petrol have already vanished into the desert air or soaked uselessly into the sand. The metallic smell mingles with dust and sweat. Hendricks doesn't know it yet, but the container in his hands represents a crisis that will define the outcome of entire campaigns, not for lack of fuel, but for lack of a proper way to carry it. Across the Mediterranean, in workshops and depots throughout the Third Reich, a different container sits stacked in perfect rows. It is angular, rigid, and colored the dark grey-green of Wehrmacht logistics. Soldiers call it the Wehrmachtskanister, the armed forces canister. To the Allies, who will later encounter it in captured supply dumps and abandoned convoys, it will become known by a simpler name, the jerry can. And in its design lies a quiet genius that the British Empire, at the height of its industrial power, has somehow failed to replicate. The jerry can is not merely a fuel container, it is a statement of engineering philosophy, a physical embodiment of German precision applied to the most mundane of objects. And in 1942, the Allies are learning a brutal lesson that wars are not won solely by grand strategy or heroic charges, but by 10,000 small decisions about logistics, about containers, about the ordinary things that allow armies to move and fight and survive. The story of the jerry can begin not with war, but with preparation. In 1937, as the world inches closer to another great conflict, German engineer Vinzenz Grünvogel receives an assignment from the Reich Ministry of Defense. The military needs a standardized fuel container, one that can be mass-produced, easily handled by soldiers under stress, resistant to damage, and above all, secure against leakage and contamination. The existing German canisters are unreliable. They leak, they corrode, they are difficult to pour from without spilling. Grünvogel approaches the problem methodically, as engineers do, breaking down every requirement into measurable criteria. What emerges from his Munich workshop is a masterpiece of functional design, a 20-litre container pressed from two halves of 0.9mm sheet steel, welded at the seams with an X-shaped indentation running vertically down the sides. The indentation is not decorative, it provides structural strength, allowing the thin steel to resist deformation under pressure while remaining light enough for a single soldier to carry when filled. The weight, when full, approximately 25 kilograms, manageable for a healthy man even under combat conditions. But the true genius lies in the details, 8 specific innovations that Grünvogel embeds into the design. First, 3 handles. Not one, as might seem sufficient, but 3, 2 at the top corners and 1 in the center. This allows a single soldier to carry 2 cans at once, 1 in each hand, using the outer handles, or it allows 2 soldiers to share the burden of 1 can, using the side handles, with the center handle available for solo transport or for tilting during pouring. The handles are not welded appendages, but stamped and folded extensions of the steel body itself, integrated into the structure, nearly impossible to break off. Second, the air chamber. Inside the jerry can, a pocket of air sits above the fuel line, deliberately designed space that allows for liquid expansion as temperatures rise and fall. In the deserts of North Africa or the frozen steppes of Russia, this simple cavity prevents containers from rupturing as their contents expand and contract. Third, the internal breather. A pin inside the spout creates a small air channel when the can is tilted for pouring, allowing air to enter as fuel exits. The result is a smooth, controlled flow without glugging, without the dangerous splashing and spilling that characterizes the British flimsies. Fourth, the recessed welding. Every seam on the jerry can is welded from the inside, then pressed flat. There are no protruding ridges to catch or tear, no external welds to corrode or weaken. The container's surface is smooth and clean. Fifth, the stamped date of manufacture and capacity markings pressed into the steel itself rather than painted on, ensuring that critical information remains legible even after years of rough handling, exposure to solvents, and abrasive sand. Sixth, the cam-locking spout closure, a lever-operated mechanism that requires no tools to open, yet creates a hermetic seal when closed. It can be operated with one hand, even while wearing thick gloves. A rubber gasket inside the closure ensures that not a single drop escapes, even when the can is turned on its side or subjected to rough transport. Seventh, the reinforced corners. Each lower corner of the can features an extra fold of steel, a small geometric detail that prevents crumpling if the container is dropped or stacked carelessly. And eighth, the stackability itself, the jerry can's flat sides and uniform dimensions allow hundreds of them to be loaded into trucks and rail cars with minimal wasted space, interlocking like bricks in a wall. By 1939, when Germany invades Poland, these canisters are standard issue throughout the Wehrmacht. They are painted grey-green and marked with Kraftstoff in white stencil, fuel. They pour across Europe in the backs of Opel Blitz trucks and Kübelwagens, an invisible but essential component of the Blitzkrieg. German tank divisions can advance rapidly because their supply lines are efficient, and their supply lines are efficient because nothing leaks, nothing spills, nothing is wasted. The British, meanwhile, are still using the same design they have relied on since the Great War. Square tin cans with a screw cap and no internal breather, prone to leaking, denting and spillage. Soldiers despise them. They call them flimsies, a term that is both descriptive and damning. A British flimsy holds 4 gallons and loses, on average, 30% of its contents during transport and handling. The losses come from leakage, evaporation, spillage during pouring, and contamination from sand and dirt entering through the poorly sealed cap. 30%. In a theatre like North Africa, where every gallon of fuel must be shipped across the Mediterranean and trucked hundreds of miles through hostile desert, this is catastrophic. In 1940, an American engineer named Paul Place, working with the US military, travels to Germany on a covert mission. His objective is to study German military logistics and, if possible, to acquire one of the new fuel canisters that have been appearing in intelligence reports. Place manages to obtain several Wehrmachtskanister units through a complex series of intermediaries and smuggles them back to the United States. He presents them to the U.S. Quartermaster Corps with a recommendation: copy this design immediately. The American military examines the canisters, recognizes their superiority, and issues contracts to manufacturers. But here the story takes a turn that will frustrate soldiers and logistics officers for the next 4 years. American industry, in its rush to produce containers at scale, simplifies Grünvogel's design. The goal is speed and cost reduction. The result is compromise. The American version of the jerry can retains the external shape, the 3 handles, and the general dimensions. But the 8 critical details begin to erode. The welding process is changed. External welds replace the recessed internal seams, creating ridges that are vulnerable to corrosion and damage. The internal breather is eliminated to save manufacturing time, causing the American cans to glug and splash when poured, wasting fuel and creating fire hazards. The cam-locking spout is replaced with a simpler screw cap, which requires more time to open and close and does not seal as reliably. The air chamber is reduced in size, making the cans more prone to rupture in extreme temperatures. The reinforced corners are omitted. The stamped markings are replaced with painted labels that fade and peel. The steel gauge is reduced slightly, shaving weight and cost, but also durability. And the quality control standards are relaxed to meet production quotas, resulting in containers that vary in reliability from batch to batch. By 1943, American forces in North Africa and later in Italy and France are using these modified cans alongside captured German originals. The difference is immediately apparent to anyone who handles both. Soldiers begin hoarding captured jerry cans, preferring them to the American-made versions. Reports filter back through the supply chain, complaints about leaking American cans, about seals that fail, about handles that snap off under weight. The U.S. Quartermaster Corps issues multiple revisions to the design specifications, attempting to correct the problems, but the fundamental compromises remain embedded in the manufacturing process. The cans improve, but they never quite match the original. And in the calculus of war, where margins are measured in miles per gallon and gallons per mission, this difference matters. What the soldiers notice, the planners quantify. Studies conducted by Allied logistics divisions in 1944 estimate that fuel wastage due to container failure and spillage runs between 15 and 20% for American-made cans, compared to less than 3% for German originals. Over the course of a campaign involving millions of gallons, the numbers are staggering. Entire convoys are needed simply to replace what is lost to poor containers. Ships that could carry ammunition or rations instead carry extra fuel to compensate for the losses. The inefficiency ripples outward, affecting everything from shipping schedules to offensive planning. Generals do not lose sleep over fuel cans, but perhaps they should, because those cans dictate how far their tanks can advance, how many sorties their aircraft can fly, how long their supply lines can stretch before snapping. The German soldiers, for their part, take their jerry cans for granted. They are simply part of the equipment, as unremarkable as a helmet or a rifle. But in the rare moments when Wehrmacht logistics officers encounter American or British containers in captured supply dumps or abandoned vehicles, they are quietly astonished by the Allied tolerance for waste. One German quartermaster, in a letter discovered after the war, describes examining a stack of British flimsies and calculating the fuel loss they represent. "It is as if," he writes, "they do not believe resources are finite, or perhaps they simply have so much that they can afford to spill it." There is something in this observation that cuts deeper than mere logistics. The jerry can, in its Prussian efficiency, reflects a worldview, a philosophy that values precision, that assumes scarcity, that seeks to extract maximum function from minimum material. The Allied tolerance for imperfect containers, conversely, reflects a different calculus. Abundance, rapid production, the assumption that any shortfall can be compensated by sheer volume. And yet abundance has its limits. In December 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, Patton's Third Army races north to relieve Bastogne. The advance is fuel-limited. Tanks and trucks run dry on the roads, stalling entire columns. Supply officers scramble to bring forward reserves, but the fuel is not the problem. The fuel exists somewhere behind the lines. The problem is getting it forward quickly enough, without loss, in containers that do not fail under the strain of rapid handling and cold temperatures. The Army uses every container it can find: American cans, captured jerry cans, improvised barrels. The captured German cans are prized, passed from unit to unit like currency. A soldier from the 4th Armored Division later recalls, "We'd trade cigarettes for a good jerry can. The German ones never leaked, never failed. Ours, you learned not to trust them." The war ends. The jerry can becomes standard NATO equipment, adopted officially by the United States, Britain, and Allied nations in the 1950s. The design is revised again, this time incorporating most of Grünvogel's original details. The internal breather returns, the camlock spout becomes standard, the reinforced corners reappear. The American military, in a quiet acknowledgement of its earlier mistakes, produces cans that finally match the 1937 German specifications. But the story of those 8 missing details lingers in the historical record, a reminder that genius is often in the specifics, in the unglamorous minutiae that no one notices until they fail. Vinzenz Grünvogel does not live to see his creation become a global standard. He dies in 1948, largely forgotten outside engineering circles, but his canister outlives him, outlives the regime that commissioned it, outlives the war it was designed to serve. Today, 70 years after its invention, the jerry can remains virtually unchanged. It sits in the backs of military vehicles and civilian trucks on every continent. It crosses deserts and jungles, mountains and tundra. It is manufactured by the millions, stamped from steel in factories that bear no resemblance to Grünvogel's Munich workshop, but follow his specifications to the millimeter. The 3 handles, the air chamber, the recessed welds, the camlock spout, all 8 details intact, all still essential. There is a lesson in this, though it is not a comfortable one. It is the lesson that good design is invisible until it is absent, that small failures compound into large catastrophes, that the side that masters the mundane often prevails over the side that focuses only on the heroic. The Allies won the Second World War not because their fuel cans were better, they were not, but because their industrial capacity was vast enough to compensate for inefficiency, because their resource base was deep enough to absorb waste. But the margin was narrower than it appeared. Had the Allies been forced to operate under the same resource constraints as the Germans, the 8 missing details might have mattered far more. They might have been decisive. In the end, the jerry can is a monument to the idea that perfection is achievable, that even the simplest object can be designed so well it becomes timeless. And it is a reminder that copying is not the same as understanding, that the form of a Faust thing can be replicated while its essence is lost. America copied Germany's jerry can and, in doing so, learned that genius does not survive translation unless every detail is honored. The 8 details were not optional flourishes, they were the design, and without them what remained was just a container, functional perhaps, but no longer perfect.